assembly required, but listeners' discretion is advised. Sit back, enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe or follow. Now, let's not keep you waiting. It's time to welcome your hosts of TNT Podcast, Tara and Tina.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. This is TNT Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at TNT Podcast Show and follow us on Twitter at T_N_T Podcast. We're your hosts, the beautiful Tina and myself,
Hi.
Tara. And again, welcome everybody to the show tonight. Thanks for joining us. The best thing you could do also, I just want to mention, is follow us, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's the best way to catch us. So this is episode 11, and we're kind of going back to real life issues with this show tonight. A topic that's, difficult for a lot of people, but it's happened to all of us in some form or another. We've all experienced it, which is grief. Loss, for some trauma. And we're really thrilled that this lovely lady has agreed to come on and talk to us tonight. Her name is Meghan Riordan Jarvis, and she is a clinical psychotherapist with training in a wide variety of treatments for trauma, loss, and grief. She is a podcast host, so we'll get her to talk about that. She has her own podcast. She's a writer and a consultant with many years of experience. So let's welcome Meghan to the show. We're super excited to have her here.
Hi, Meghan.
Welcome,
Hi.
Meghan.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for having me. I've been excited to get on and talk with you all day today. So this is a highlight. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, grief is tough, right? And maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to become a psychotherapist in this field.
Sure. So I live and work in just outside of Washington, D.C., where I've been for about I've been here since 1996. And I live here with my, husband and my 3 kids. And I work primarily as a trauma-informed therapist, which essentially means when you think about what trauma is, it's an event that happens. And when you become traumatized, the event leaves an energetic imprint in your body that is less than it was before the trauma. So when we're talking about COVID or we're talking about grief and loss, everybody experiences the trauma of COVID, but not everybody's traumatized by it, meaning their system doesn't necessarily make meaning. And there's a really well-known specialist in this field, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And his way of talking about it is saying that your nervous system gets overwhelmed by the loss. And we were just sort of talking in the kind of green room a minute ago, but part of what we were talking about is the 3 of us were sharing our own experiences with that. So I've been in the field working with clients who, by the time they come to see me, they are really struggling with symptoms. The symptoms are the energy of the event, the trauma stuck inside their body. So it could be they're seeing, when they close their eyes, they're seeing pictures. And, I work with people who it's not just a death. The loss could be loss of control. They were in a car accident, or the loss could be that their business went under. But something where the energy in their system is causing them to have symptoms. They're not sleeping, they're not eating, particularly with grief and loss. Some of what happens, and this is really often true when it's sudden loss, is that the symptoms will look like memory loss or brain fog.
Okay.
And one of the things that I teach people about that, and we were just talking a second ago about, there is a standard grief event, which is You learn a terrible thing happens. You have a reaction to it. You go to bed and you wake up in the morning, and for 30 seconds you forget.
Right.
And there's a beautiful book called The Grieving Brain by a woman, a neuroscientist and a therapist named Mary Frances O'Connor. And she teaches at University of Austin. And her book really explains the reason for that is very similar to the reason why we have brain fog or memory loss, is that your brain is a tool that both it takes in information, it takes in data, and it codes it, and it is predictive. So it, based on the experience that it's had, the example I used with you is coffee. If I see brown liquid in a mug, I already know that that is coffee because I have tasted coffee before. Now it could be root beer, but if it's in a coffee mug, I'm taking in all that data and I put it to my mouth and I expect it to taste like coffee.
Right.
So when you have lived, as I did, for 45 years with a mother, and one day you wake up and she is no longer on the earth, that is a lot of information for your brain to take in and update all at once. And our minds are sort of built to work against that. I don't love this idea. It doesn't make me feel safe. So what Bessel van der Kolk talks about, and what trauma therapists talk about, is we have this tiny little walnut-shaped organ in the back of our brain called your amygdala. And it enlarges. So it's at the base of your head. And if you can imagine that when it enlarges, it creates like a dam. And you have these nerves from your spine that go up into your brain, the vagus nerve, which sends information up and down, which is unique.
Mm-hmm.
When it's blocked off, all the critical thinking that we do is here in your prefrontal cortex, and all the other twisty parts of your brain are back here, and they all do things like they direct you when you're full. They tell you that you want to have sex. They indicate that it's time to go to sleep. When the amygdala enlarges, and Bessel calls it like a smoke alarm, it detects danger and it enlarges. What it's doing is it's cutting off your thinking so that you will just stay in your instinctive responses: fight, flight, freeze. So a lot of people, when they get that terrible information, they go into fight, flight, freeze. Some people will throw up. Some people will say, just have wild reactions. And many of us hate our reactions to what, they do this really well in that TV show, This Is Us. I don't know if either of you watch that show.
I don't, but I've heard about it.
The main character gets terrible news, and she's like unwrapping and eating a candy bar. And it's just this really beautiful scene that's totally doesn't make any sense. Why would she be eating a candy bar when she's just been told her husband dies? But many of us have those experiences because the information is not getting to the front of our brain where we do our critical thinking. It's all like almost like electrical currents going in the wrong direction in the back of your brain. And what I say it's like is having the back of your head hit a gong. And it's just reverberating.
Right.
And there are elements to that, like, your hippocampus, this tiny little part of your brain, codes all this information. It does all kinds of stuff in your thalamus and your hypothalamus. They are the parts of your brain that are responsible for things like your memory. And when it's ringing like a gong, it's not creating even like consequential memory.
Yeah.
So when people say, why can't I remember the day that my dad died? Generally what they're telling you is that their brain is still ringing. So fresh grief is this like full contact sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where we have all these symptoms. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yes. And so many physical symptoms, just even from what I've experienced, can't eat, can't sleep. It almost feels that depending on the type of grief, it can just suck the life out of you. Your mouth gets dry, but you don't want to have anything to drink. But I think what amazed me was how long the body can go on nothing. On nothing but this grief with no food, hardly any water. It seems like days, but it's incredible what the body can do.
So because your brain, your instinctive brain, we call it the reptilian brain because even a lizard has this much brain. You know, it doesn't have all the parts that are up towards the front that make us human and critical thinkers and empathy. But the base of our brain is a reptilian brain. It's fight, flight, freeze. It just codes information, you know, plus or minus, good or bad. And we're in that part of our brain when we're in trauma. And what that does is it sends these incredible signals to the body, like protect all the core organs. So
Right.
it rushes blood to the stomach and the heart and the lungs in case you are actually in front of a bear, because the body has no way of knowing that. All it knows
Right.
is the alarm went off. It rushes all the blood to the stomach. It often creates this immobilization that can take months to come out of, where people just feel like they can't move their body. They have low muscle tone.
Yeah.
And all of that, like if you were to sit down with a doctor, they can map out, you know, this is the part is the vascular system. This part is, and tell you why you're able to subsist with no food for that many days. And it's because your body's gone into this energy conservation that is really meant to just keep you alive.
Yeah, keep you sustained enough to, yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, it blew my mind at all the physical aspects that come with grief.
Right.
And different kinds of grief, you know, might show different the way you react, you know.
It does. And there are, you know, when I'm writing and talking, I'm often talking about someone losing a person, but I have on my platform, Grief is My Side Hustle. And on my website, we do every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, grief writing prompts together. And I'm pretty careful to sort of, you know, include, it could be a pet you're talking about. It could be the loss of a job or the loss of a marriage or the loss of your health, or because grief is really the reaction. It is the energetic reaction to loss.
Right.
So it's how am I adapting to the loss? What is it that I'm doing with the energy that has shown up in my system that really doesn't know what to do with this kind of like left-hand turn that my life has taken?
Right.
And so, you know, and again, we talked about this for a few minutes, but one of the things that's really dicey for grievers, and, you know, it really comes from a loving place, is like they don't want to compare losses, right? Like my dad died when he was 80. I don't want to be wailing about that in front of somebody who just lost their 7-year-old son. And so it can really paralyze us, because I actually need my experience to be validated and they need their experience to be validated. And so we kind of have to be able to find this middle space. But one thing I will say is that early grief, really fresh grief, is very self-centered. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. I mean, it's very self-centered. Like you are trying to figure out, the analogy I gave before is like when my mother died, it felt like someone had removed the continent of Africa from the globe. And I was trying to figure out how to navigate when I didn't even know what any of the other countries were, because I've always oriented my understanding of the globe based on this giant continent. And without it, I'm really lost.
Right.
And so when I say I'm self-centered, what I mean is I am constantly trying to center myself in a way that I understand the world.
Like processing.
And,
yeah. And you can feel really self-conscious. You know, I lost my mom when I was 45, and I was like a full grown-up woman. I had a business. I'd written some stuff. I'd talked to people. People come and think I'm an expert in things. I felt so self-conscious around people who knew me to be that person, because I did not feel even 1% of that person. I felt so completely obliterated and confused. Right. So part of it is when we're looking for support in our grief, we do have to be careful to sort of select in to the stuff that's going to be helpful for us in the moment and not require much of us.
Right.
So in fresh grief, it has to really be all the way about you.
Yeah.
And as your symptoms begin to settle and you are less overwhelmed, one of the things that happened for me that I talk about a lot is that I was just angry all the time. I was angry at my children for asking for water. I was angry at my patients for wanting me to call them back. I was angry at the sky for being cloudless. I mean, I was just angry all the time. And that's not a way that I know myself to be. I'm kind of like
Right.
happy all the time.
Right. Right.
But that reaction, I think, was helping me to have something to do other than feel sorrow all the time.
Yes, because one thing I learned about life is it keeps going.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to keep going. And I know even with Tina, like she's so good at just keep going with things where, I feel like I would be more, I don't know, I'm not sure. I'd like to think about
And that's
it.
a perfect example.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example because I just continued to work and everybody was like, why are you at work?
Yeah.
Well,
So
what am I
that's a good
supposed to
point.
do? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah. What's right?
They, I guess, were looking at me and thought I should be at home laying in bed.
Yeah.
I just continued to work.
Yeah. The shoulds of grieving don't do, shoulds are really crappy. And they're based on, I think actually when people are like, shouldn't you be X, Y, and Z? I actually think they mean that in a loving way. They're confused.
agree.
They don't know how to show up for you. They want to help. But in reality, what I would say is we're all, the same way we're wired to like thrive and survive, we are actually wired to grieve. We are.
Yeah.
We do this. It's a universal experience. It's a human experience. And the same way that like we move in collective, most people want to be around other people for at least part of our lives.
Right.
We have these intrinsic ideas of what is the right way for us to grieve. And there is literally nothing that anyone can tell you that is wiser than your instinct. So it is possible that the loss of your mom, Tina, is so profound that you need to take it in tiny bites, and that going to work is a beautiful distraction to keep your system from being completely overwhelmed. And so going to work is actually life-saving. It's keeping you on the planet while there's no Africa and you're trying to now, be a cartographer and figure out your life. That's totally possible. I have worked with people who they didn't even shed a tear for 10 years. And now something happened and they can't stop crying. And they say, oh my God, why didn't I do this before? You didn't do it before because it wasn't even available to you before.
Right.
It's available now. And the beauty of grief is, and I said this to you guys before, we code, the brain is brilliant. It's like it has colored file folders. And let's pretend that grief is purple. Every grief, everything from I didn't get cast as Sandy in the school play, my 8th grade boyfriend broke up with me, all the things that are loss get coded in that purple folder. So you can come back to it and be processing it for the rest of your life. That can feel heavy and hard, but it's also like a gift. There's no right way. I had a guy on my podcast who, he lost his son and he drank for the next 10 years. And to me, that's an okay way. Like, sorry about the alcoholism and the addiction component, but he survived losing his son, which he didn't think he was going to. He got sober and now he does a lot of like full contact grief work.
Oh, wow.
And the grief work is the talking about the feelings, being with the feelings, but he couldn't do it when he was waking up every day and seeing, his other son have no brother to play with.
Right.
Yeah.
So that thing that people think they know, where they're like passing judgment a little bit, is so fear-based. Probably also comes from love and is totally and completely ignorant and useless.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that you think based on your own experience is not relevant here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I know sometimes it's hard to know when someone does pass and you want to be there for them. It's hard to know what to say, how to approach someone. How often would you check in on them? Like, what are some of the things that people could do to be supportive for somebody that's grieving without doing too much or being,
I love this question. And I feel like we could have a whole 5 hours on this question, because what you'll find if you go to Google is a whole bunch of lists. don't say these things, do say these things. I think those lists are okay. Like as a rough guide, I think they're okay.
Right.
I think in general, we have to ask ourselves a series of questions. Like, how awkward am I with grief and loss? Can I show up? Am I comfortable? Do I talk this language fluently? And I'll tell you, I mean, this is my bread and butter. It's what I do all day long. And I'm still awkward about it. I still wish I wasn't calling. I still wish I wasn't showing up and having to look in the face of that raw, unbelievable pain.
Yeah.
So
Raw.
I mean, that is the truth. Like, I have all my ways, but I think the thing that gets lost is when you are trying to show up for someone else, the likelihood that you're really going to do anything to help them is very small. It's like handing a marathon runner a cup of water. You're not helping them run the marathon. You're letting them know that you're there,
right,
and that you care that they're running, but you are not running for them.
right.
So I think if you step back from sort of the pressure of like, I need to do something helpful.
Right. You don't want to feel like you're not doing anything for them either.
Right. And instead go into how do I express my caring? Right. Like, if you never cook for anyone ever, if you're not a baker and suddenly you're on a sign-up Genius of like, okay, you're bringing banana bread to the family, like, that's going to feel weird to you. It's going to feel weird to them. But, maybe also, and I have a fair number of corporate clients, and I have one company that I asked them, what do you guys do when there's a loss? What do you do? And they were like, well, we send flowers. And the woman who was the head of HR got choked up. And I was like, what's going on? And she said, we send the same flower basket that we send when they become employees.
Oh, dear.
We send the same basket. And I was like, oh, shoot, that must not feel good. And it didn't take this company very long to have a conversation of like, what do we do? What can we offer? And they're a company that has a lot of travel. And I'm telling you, like, in a half an hour, they were like, what if we offered hotel rooms to families who were traveling for funerals? What if we comped those hotel rooms with like all our millions of points? And that felt so meaningful to them. And maybe the family would say, we don't need that.
Right.
But that is a unique and meaningful thing to offer. So the examples that I give now, it's not a fair example because my best friend has been my best friend since I was 11. But when my mother died, it was very devastating to her too, because she has been in my life forever. She turned to another friend who'd had a mother die and said, tell me what was helpful for you. And that friend said, someone called all my mother's doctors and told them that she had died, so I didn't have to do it. So my friend came into my house 4 hours after my mother had died and said, give me her address book. And she called like 25 providers, and I never had to make those phone calls.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have thought to ask that, right?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. No.
So that's when people are saying, what should I do? I say, let's think about this. I'm not going to tell you what to do. What would be meaningful to you? What do you have to offer? Are you the kind of friend that does go and walk into the house? Or are you more like the neighbor?
Right.
So if you're more like the neighbor, like, what would be a neighborly thing to do? Would it make sense to cut their lawn?
Right.
Would it make sense to, can you offer something concrete? Even when people are like deeply religious, like I had a miscarriage before my daughter was born, and it was late term miscarriage. And my husband, who worked at the World Bank at the time, had this mishmash of people from all different countries who worked for him. And they all went to the National Cathedral for a service and prayed for us. And I'm not like a church prayer. But I have never forgotten that because it seemed so deeply sincere and unique to them.
Right.
I had a friend when my dad died, she sent me a pair of like pale pink Adidas sneakers. And the card said, this is the worst. These sneakers are cute.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. That was it. And when I wear those sneakers, I'm like, she just sent me the best kind of love she could come up with.
Yeah.
Right.
I do think there are some things that are universally pretty bad. Like when people say things like, well, at least your dad, just don't
Ugh.
ever say at least. Just don't ever say at least.
Right.
It's really hard on people to hear they're in a better place, even if they were riddled with cancer and in pain.
Yeah.
I want them with me. Just like, don't say those things.
Right.
That's not helpful. And I think anytime you tread into the waters of like, my poor mom, after I had a miscarriage, she was like, your baby is an angel in heaven. And I was like, woman, do not with that with me.
Yeah.
That made
right.
her feel better. But so anything, I
Right.
generally say, like, don't tread deep into religion unless you like go to Bible study with this person. Like, don't
Right.
assume,
Right.
don't assume, because that, and when people are grieving, the other thing that I say to them is like, if someone was stepping on your foot, you wouldn't just let them step on your foot. You would say, you're stepping on my foot.
Right.
So when my mother was really active in her church, very Catholic. And when her little church ladies came over to hug and kiss me and my brothers and sisters, they would say things like, she's in heaven with your dad now. And I just said, like, what? I wish I could believe that, but I don't.
Right.
So that sort of feels like you're pinching me. Could you just tell me a story about my mom that I don't know? Like,
Yeah.
just spend so much time with her. Like, when you think of a good story, I'd love to hear it. And that's the other thing. When you're someone who's just gonna send a card because really you're more on the periphery, I think of it as like orbits. Like, how close is your orbit
Right.
to the griever who is the sun? Know your orbit. Like, I had a neighbor who was like, want to go out for a drink? And I mean, because I was really, my mind was really, I said it out loud. I was like, we have never gone out for a drink before. You don't even know if I drink. Why would we go out now? Because my mother died. I mean, it was so rude what I said.
I know. No, but you would think that, right? Like, that's
Right.
something
Yeah,
that
but
even
when
I would
you're-
think of.
Yeah, when you're sending a card, if you have a photo of the person, send it. Even if you
Yeah.
think they already have it, just send it. And if you have a story, a true story, don't make one up. But if you have a story of an interaction that you had, even if it is really slight, I remember how worried you were about your son getting into college. Just something that's real. Put it in the card.
Right.
Because those are the things that stick.
Yeah.
Those are the authentic. And those are the things we're never going to get any more of. We're never going to get any more pictures, and we're never going to get any more stories.
Right.
So if you can share those are my top tips. And when you are in a room, as everyone has been with somebody that is recently bereaved, I have on my website a bunch of questions. Just ask them questions. You can walk over and say, I was so sorry to hear. Are you able to sleep at all? Are you eating? Like, is food a friend or is it miserable?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a faith base that helps you?
Right.
Is there anybody that has been surprisingly, by
Right.
your side here, or anybody that is driving, like, makes you want to shave your head because they're driving you crazy?
Right.
And you will quickly know if that person is like, oh my God, thank you. It's like you moved over so I can sit down on this bench. You'll quickly know if they want to talk, or if they don't answer any of your questions, they're not going to talk to you.
Yeah.
And that's also fine. They're still feeling the love from you. They're still feeling it, but it's totally within their boundaries.
Yeah, you're not. And that's something you touched on too, boundaries. And it when something like this happens, it's okay. I mean, it's okay to set boundaries anyway.
Oh,
but
you have to.
It's very important to set boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, again, if we go back to what that brain is doing, it's like you're trying to learn to live in a different land that, like you were picked up in a van, shoved
Like
in a van,
foreign.
end up in a foreign country that is like different smells, different temperatures. You don't have the right clothes and you don't speak the language.
Right.
So, you are doing everything you can to just show up for that, to survive that all that extra stuff is we just have to, the people around us need to give us grace, a lot of grace. And that is tricky. One of the other things that happens when there's been a really profound loss is that there's a big sort of upheaval sometimes with friendships and relationships. People who you wanted and expected to show up because you were there when her mother died, like she's nowhere to be found. Yeah. And, the neighbor that you barely knew that you talked to at the pool suddenly is like a real source of comfort.
Right.
And some of that we don't walk back from. Some of, it's also true that when you have a baby, your friendships change, and when you graduate from
Right.
college, and when you switch jobs. But because you're already in pain, it really sucks that these upheavals happen with friendships. And what I say to folks who are really struggling with all that symptomatic stuff, what I say is, you can work on your friendship on the other side of the island. Like, just it will be there.
Yeah.
You can decide that friendship's over on the other side of the island. You can decide you need to have a conversation with that friend on the other side of the island. But right now, it's almost like you can't see past your hands. You just
Right.
need to, drink water, take showers, and get your system, your nervous system, back to a sense of, okay, feet are on the ground, the earth is spinning on its axis, and I am still alive.
Right.
And it is, Tina, I know you know this. It really does feel that hard. It really
Yeah.
does feel that hard. And I said this to you guys already, but my mom has been gone for 2.5 years. I still can't believe she's not. I will turn to my husband regularly and be like, oh my God, I can't believe she's not here.
Yeah.
I cannot
Right.
believe she is not on this earth. I can't believe I can't call her.
I know.
And it,
Yep.
and it comes with a swell in the throat, and it comes with the tug and the yearning. And you just have to like move through all of that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I know people who 25 years later can't believe that they're.
Yeah. I mean, that brings up something I was thinking about too. Like, when does it become, I don't want to say too long, because there isn't any time limit on anything,
Right.
but maybe when it starts to become a real problem for you,
So good.
and it's starting to take over your life. You can't
Yeah.
function. Like, when does it become not so normal?
So that's such a good question. And you guys might be aware that there's been this like real hot controversy of a new diagnosis that's been put in the code books recently, a prolonged grief disorder.
I did see something
Yeah.
about this.
And in some ways it's like the worst thing ever. And in other ways, it doesn't really matter. But where people got up in arms, and I'm certainly one of them, is that they put this like, well, if after a year you're still having these symptoms, then then we're calling it disordered grief. And the argument, but right. So, I mean, Tina's face is like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what the, right,
Yeah.
right.
It's
And
like-
so anyone who has ever grieved like what I just said is some people don't even start grieving until 7 years later. So all of that is to say, and people have written really brilliantly on that. Rebecca Soffer from Modern Loss and my friend Hope Edelman wrote a beautiful piece, just sort of responding to that and explaining how that is going to really send the wrong message to grievers.
Right.
Much like, and I don't want to go on a tangent, but we talked a little bit about, these old 5 stages of grief.
Yes.
A very
we've
long
always
time
heard
ago.
about these
Yeah,
stages
so-
of grief, right?
Right. It's been there because we didn't have anything else. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a wonderful social scientist and a clinician, intended to talk to people who were dying. So the stages were about accepting your death that is impending. You're sick and you're dying. And some folks extrapolated that across to grief. And there just are no stages. There are no stages. There are no stages. There are no stages. You don't go from here to there in any kind of linear way. There are some adjectives and some verbs that many grievers experience, but there's no right way to grieve. Period,
Right.
period, period. So when we go back and we're looking at all of the experiences that grievers are having, and we are trying to guide them around this diagnosis or the non-existence of this diagnosis, really, it's so simple. It's, are you suffering with symptoms?
Yeah.
Have you been
Mhm.
suffering for a while? I monitor a bunch of grief and loss boards, and my husband's like, you cannot go be a clinician on these grief and loss boards. But I see things that kill me. People who say every time they close their eyes, they see their husband's dead body.
Mm.
And that's been going on for 7 years. So you know what? That is terrible,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
we have treatments for that.
Right.
And because we haven't educated the population very well, and I blame the media, I blame psychology, I blame myself. There is a treatment called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. EMDR will help take those very vivid images and tear them into little bits of paper and put them in different places in your brain so that when you close your eyes, you don't see them. And sometimes people get relief in one session.
That's incredible.
It is incredible.
Yeah.
And it's a treatment, right? Like when you go get your hair colored, that is a treatment. And when you come out,
Right.
your hair is a different color. There's a lot of like the idea around therapy is like, oh, well, I'm going to go talk to this lady. I'm going to feel better because she's going to say like, that's okay that you feel that way. And then I'm going to come out and go back to my job. When you have trauma inside your system, energy inside your system, so that things are less than, you have made meaning and your life is less than. I can't even sleep at night because I close my eyes and I see my husband's dead body. So now I sleep in the basement with an eye patch on and I take these medicines. All of that is indication that you're traumatized. That
Right.
is trauma.
That's trauma.
So what I say to people is, if you don't know if this is trauma or if this is going to resolve on its own, go talk to somebody.
Yes, absolutely.
Sign up for one session. And it's, that's hard because A, therapy is expensive, and B, it's really, really hard to find a therapist right now.
Yeah.
So while what I want you to do is go find someone and have that person say, yes, this is trauma. What I would also say is, here's how I knew I had trauma when my mom died. This is me. This is what was going on in my body. My symptoms were getting worse and more frequent and not better and less.
Right.
That's it. That's the simple. So if you're not sure, take a piece of paper, write down, how did you sleep last night? If that's your symptom, you're not sleeping, keep a record for yourself. Be a scientist.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep it journaling.
Because we also don't report very well. When something bad is happening, we sort of misreport it. We say it's happening all the time. And you talk to a spouse and they're like, no, the last time was Thursday. It hasn't, it's been a long time. But if you're not sure, it should be, if your body is metabolizing the energy, if it's moving through you and not leaving footprints of less than, you should be having lessening symptoms. That does not mean you're not going to randomly burst into tears in the grocery store when you hear your, little brother's favorite song. That is all going to happen. It doesn't mean you're not going to miss them on significant days and random Tuesdays. Grief is with you forever. You will carry it forever.
Yes.
But the symptoms should not be getting worse. They should not be staying still. Your body should be breaking it down, learning it, and relieving it. And so when there's a guy named George Bonanno, and he did a big study, and he sort of came and said, listen, like maybe between 6 and 12% of people are in this category of folks who have traumatized loss. So it's not an enormous number. Now, I think it's probably bigger than 6 and 12 because I think a lot of people don't even know what grief symptoms are.
Right.
But that's my social scientist. But I do think most people can tell you because they're not admitting it to friends. Friends are saying, how are you doing? And they're not saying, well, I haven't slept in 12 days.
Right.
They know that there's something going on with their body that is really not normal. They can, they're lying or not revealing how much they haven't eaten. Someone says they look thin and they say, no, I'm still wearing the same jeans. When we're doing that kind of stuff, your body is suffering in a way that it maybe doesn't need to. And there are these interventions like coloring your hair that you can come into my office and I can do, and you will walk out and maybe feel better in one treatment. And the reason we don't know a lot about that is relatively new. That is built on Bessel's work. That's built on Peter Levine's work and Pat Ogden, people who have come to understand that actually when energy gets stuck in the body, that's when we're in trouble. And we need to use body-centered. So when people come in and I'm treating them for trauma, we're not doing a lot of talking. It looks more like a modern dance class. There's touch involved, there's movement, there's sound, and it's not how do you think about this? We're not,
Right.
we call it a bottom up approach, meaning we go into the body and I ask you questions like, well, where do you feel tension? And what does that tension look like and feel like? And then we try to move that tension through you.
Right.
So it looks a little wonky.
Yeah.
And it requires a little maybe suspension of critical thought. But the thinking down, when you understand that part of what's gone on is your brain got a little, trying to think your way out of it doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. No. And
So one of my questions about that is, are there a lot of therapists that know about the new procedures or, that you're talking about? Because I feel like a lot of people go to therapy and they are just getting to be able to talk to them, and they say, oh, this is normal. And I don't hear of anybody, at least around me, that goes to a therapist that their therapist is saying, oh no, you're having trauma.
Yeah.
So are
Right.
there different types of therapists that people
There
should be
are.
looking for? Okay.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so the honest answer about it is there are many different ways to become a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't even assume, like when I went to social work school, which means I could have been somebody who like helped people put their babies into foster care. That's my degree. Or I could have gone and lobbied on the Hill for policies.
Right.
I have a degree that's really like a broad brushstroke. So when I came out of school, I did all of these trainings that were based on who I needed to treat. I mean, honestly, that was how I became a trauma therapist. Was people showed up in my office and I was like, I have no idea how to help you.
Oh,
and then I would go to the community, and I live in a major city where a lot of trainings come.
Right.
So partly the trauma work that I am doing is new, and people are being trained in it. I'm trained in sensory motor psychotherapy, and like when I was training in it, they were coming to DC from Colorado like only once every couple of years. There are thousands of people who are in the DC area now who are trained in these modalities, but it's taken a little while. What's tricky is these things cost us a ton of money to get trained in.
Right.
And so there's this, one of the things I've been disappointed about in this country is that during COVID, we're not incentivizing people to become trained in this work. And we should be. The federal government should be, telling people that they can have subsidized degrees, that they can get these trainings and be providing these trainings really quickly. People don't like when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Go ahead.
Any body-centered work. So Reiki, sometimes it can be as effective as EMDR or sensory motor psychotherapy or IFS. I have used Reiki as effectively massage, touch. When you
touch
think
is
about
big deal.
Yeah. And when clients come in and say to me, acupuncture's helping, I don't really even understand acupuncture, but I believe you that it's helping.
Right.
So what I try to partner up with clients is think about this as there is a residue. Actually, the image that I use, which works with people who are my age, is like somebody handed you a watermelon and you have to carry this around for the rest of your life. But you don't have to carry it like that. You don't have to carry it in your arms. Like you can mix it into a cocktail and drink it. You can put 4 of the rinds in your pocket, but it's yours. You have to figure out how to grow the muscles and the capacity to carry it. And so sometimes when I'm talking to grievers, where we start with is what are you being drawn to? And people will tell me things like, well, it's weird. I started writing, or I pulled my old violin out of all that is places for your energy to land. And so that's what I start to encourage. Great. Bring your violin in here. Tell me about your violin. Add 10 minutes of violin work. And then I add the education on top of that. Let me tell you why I think the music is really important. We're 98% water in our bodies. Music vibrates through your body. I think you're using your violin and your love of that kind of music to move the energy through your body.
Right.
The quantum physics of this is like, while our beloveds, they die, their energy stays. And so in my mind, it makes perfect sense that like I might feel some of that energy
Yeah.
in my body.
Right.
And I don't want to get
Right.
rid of all of it, but I want it to feel manageable. I
Right.
want to
Right.
feel back inside my system. You know, one of the things that's happened to me in the 5 almost 6 years since my mom and dad have died is that I've put on a lot of weight, which is not, you know, it's also probably perimenopause. You know, it's like the trifecta of all the beautiful things
Mhm.
that can go on.
Right.
That we're stuck with.
Yeah, but also instinctively, my body didn't want to move very much. I was like, stillness felt like
Right.
peace to me.
Yeah.
And I have intellectual feeling about that now. Like, wow, I really wish I could have dragged my butt off that couch and gone for more walks. But I think the grief trajectory is still going.
Yeah.
Because for a long time, I just like didn't want to move. And lately, I can't stop moving. I can't stop. And that's what I mean when I say we have an instinct. And it doesn't help to have your mother-in-law tell you that when she had this experience, this is how she did it. And she thinks
Right.
you should like
That's
bless.
the worst too, when you get all these opinions and other people's
Yeah.
experiences. And, you know, I found even for me, I wanted to be alone mostly, but I would gravitate to people that had been through something, you know, sort of similar or some kind of experience, because I felt more comfortable,
That's
you
right.
know, being with
Well,
somebody.
it's almost like they speak the native language of it, right? And so
Yeah,
like
you
it's just
get it,
it's more
or
comfortable to be around people who speak your language.
right,
Yeah.
Even if they're not even talking, you just like know that
Right.
they
Right.
get the
That's right.
inflection and the tone of those
Right.
things. And you know, what I do want to say about grief and loss, particularly in this time, because you know, we've lost 1 million people in the United States, we've lost 6 million people globally. We have 9 grievers associated with every one person who dies. That's a number that social scientists have given us. That means there's 9 million people that are trying to figure out how to grieve just in the United States.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
wild.
It's,
That's
I mean, it's
wild.
so it is its own sort of epidemic. And I also think of it as like what you guys are doing on your podcast and I do with my work is this notion that we are just encouraging maybe a little less of the discomfort around it. Like
Right.
I think about, I don't know if you guys follow the work of Brene Brown. She talks about shame a lot.
No.
So her work has really been to explain how shame can really destroy relationships. And in
Right.
the field of psychology, everybody talks about shame now. Like it wasn't a word that people cared that much about, but now we understand that when someone feels ashamed, you know, she's connected it to school shooters and to divorces and to poor health. I mean, she's really helped us understand that this is incredibly significant. One of the things that I feel hopeful about is because work was so disrupted and companies are struggling
Mhm.
get to even know whether or not they should be bringing people back into the office.
Right.
I am getting daily phone calls from folks who are sort of like, help us understand how to show up for the people with the challenges that they're having. And
Right.
I get to say, thank you for calling me. You're right. They're
Yeah.
grieving. They might be grieving the team that they're not coming back to. They might be
Right.
grieving the, you know, the bottom line
Position
of
or
it,
the
or
yeah.
their grandmother, you know,
Right.
but we are going to have to be able to identify grief and loss everywhere.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be able to have some understanding of what happens to the body so we don't keep hurting each other with it by saying stupid things to each other about what you should and shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And we are going to have to be coaches to each other. Coaches who say, you can do this. You can do it.
Yeah.
I will be here. I'll help you.
Right.
But I can't do it for you. I can't tell you what to do. I don't know.
Right.
You know, that's when people come into my office, when they come onto my podcast, when I'm writing, that is the message that I'm always trying to impart is the hope, right? And it's not hard to do it because everybody will grieve in their life.
Right.
Every single one of us does it.
Right.
That's right.
And it isn't always, the footprints aren't always terrible.
No,
You know,
and I think it's okay to not be okay, too.
There's
right?
a
Because
terrific book by Megan Devine that is literally, the title is that, and that it is okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And it's a process and an arc.
Mhm.
right, it is. It totally is. Yeah.
And some people discover that they want to write a book and they never even considered writing a book
Right.
before. Or
Yeah.
some people want to start a podcast, or some people want to raise money for cancer. And
Right.
those things, which are great things. I mean, we
Right.
call that traumatic growth because here's the trauma and then something grew from it.
Yeah, I've been
And
there.
right. And we want, right. Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we talked briefly about that some of your passion that came back in for being with cars and racing and all of that came after something terrible happened.
Right.
So, you know, and that actually is also true of people who are grieving, is that in early grief, it's all we do. It's a
Right.
full-time job, full contact sport. And then over time, we continue to live forward in our life.
Yes.
And we continue to yearn for the past. That's the
Yeah.
grief. And we continue to live. And we will incorporate the fact that that terrible loss happened in the way that we move forward.
Right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's why grief is with us forever. You know, when people are like, "Oh, are you recovered from your grief?" Like the analogy that I use
Wouldn't
all
that
the
be
time-
nice though?
Wouldn't that
Right.
be nice? But you know, no
can
one
be
ever
such
asked
a
me if I've
shitty
recovered.
feeling.
If I've recovered from being a parent, you know, and I would say that
Oh, yeah.
that it is as transformative, right? Like, it's pretty traumatic to have a baby. And nobody ever implied that when I was like, I'm tired, or I'm hungry all the time, or I don't know why I had this baby, or I don't like my husband anymore. Nobody ever implied that I was doing any of that wrong.
Right.
There is an ethos with most women that are sort of like, yeah, no, that stuff is hard, super, super hard. It feels bad because it is hard.
Right.
And then, you know, when I had my second baby, it was less hard. And when I had my third baby, I was like, do I need to stay in the hospital? I can just go home.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, I remember getting in the car with my daughter, who's now 14, and being like, are they really going to let me take this baby home? Like,
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
is not a
it's
good
pretty
idea.
wild. It's pretty
Really? Like,
wild.
shouldn't those people be coming with me?
Right.
So
It's
there
a bit
is-
traumatic.
But no one ever implied that just because it felt overwhelming, I was doing it wrong.
Right. That's a very good
And
point.
I'm changed forever, right? I'll never not be a parent. I'll never not be a griever.
Right.
Right.
And, you know, I think if we could just have much more grace around this idea that it is for each of us individually to figure out that we really do need to throw some education in there as to what does happen with the body and what we need to look for. And one piece that I didn't mention today, you know, there are, for people who had trauma in their childhood, you will always be more susceptible to traumatic events traumatizing you later in life. And there's a Kaiser Permanente several years ago now, I think it was 1992, put together a study that's called the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's these 10 things that if they happen in your childhood, if you accumulate more than 4, and the things are like, if your parent was incarcerated, if you lived below the poverty line, if you were raised by someone who was suffering with addiction, if there was a death in your, you know, a whole bad stuff. If you had 4 of those, it correlates to being more likely to have bad outcomes with other things like your health and being traumatized later on in life. And so that's another piece that I, you know, when people come in, I ask them that. Did anything bad happen to you before you were 10 years old?
Right.
And if they say like, yeah, well, my cousin died in a motorcycle accident, I'm like, okay, well, some of what's hard for you right now is based on that. Sometimes it's about sort of the way you were raised, like attachment profile wise. So people can't always say to me, like, I had this kind of a mom, but a question that I will ask is about attachment. Like, is it, what are breakups like for you? You know, are those hard? Like, do you lose your sense of self when you go through a breakup? Like, okay, well, so that tells us something about what it's like to have attachments break for you.
Right.
And we don't need to judge that. That just is what it is. You're not doing it wrong. It's sort of stitched into the fiber of how you were raised and who you became.
Right.
And so, okay, you're asking me why, you know, this event didn't affect your husband in the same way it's affecting you. And that might be why.
Right.
It might be why. We don't know that it's why. But when we can sort of let the general population know those things, we just like start to peel away the idea that somebody is ever doing any of this wrong.
Right. Yeah. I know.
And
And so
when
many people have it in their brains that they are, or, is there a right way, a wrong way? How long?
Oh my God. I mean, when
how long am I going to feel like this? I just want this to be over. It hurts
you're
so
given
bad.
3 days to off work.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
The message told, you're supposed to be fine now. Go grieve your grandfather in 3 days. Like, there is a reason why people are confused. And when they come in and say to me, like, well, it's been 3 months, and another thing that people often ask me is about grieving itself. They'll say, like, well, I didn't grieve my mother. Like, what does that even mean? Like, usually what they mean is they didn't have like a big breakdown, crying, hysterical, like, Meryl Streep's hysterical moment. And then I say, like, listen, grieving as a verb is a million things. You spent 4 months cleaning out her house. That's grieving.
Yeah.
That's grieving. But because we don't talk about it, we don't share it. We sort of say, like, go to your therapist for 50 minutes and then, like, come back to work.
Yeah.
Or
we
go
need
to
to have these
funeral.
more conversations,
Just normalizing it. And honestly, I just don't think we're going to have a choice. I mean, I think when people are going back into workplaces, which I do think will happen because I think we're actually social creatures. And I think I think it's good for us to be, particularly, people in their 20s who are trying to learn how to be grownups. They need models of grownups to be around, and they need to, like, meet their partner at the softball game, So I do think some of the social structures I think we're going to see that people crave them and need them. And there's some brain science behind that too. But as we do that, we are absolutely going to have, conversations about grief and loss, the way corporations were, bringing in mindfulness gurus or, nutrition gurus, like, we're just going to have to add the grief and loss experts who come in and say, all this is normal.
Yeah.
It's all normal.
And it's such a big part. It's a part of life, right? Like it's
100% of us will grieve. 100% of us. So I find it really fascinating that we don't teach it as a core course, it's crazy that we also don't teach, like, I don't know, how to run a budget. We don't teach people that in college.
Real life stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, every single person on the planet will experience loss.
Yeah.
And most
pretty
people,
incredible.
That every single person, it's the one thing we will all do, and we all do it in the same way in our bodies.
Right.
So even when people are like, well, it's also personal and it's also specific. Yes. And we all have human bodies. Like, we all have spleens and kidneys and brains and vagus nerves and, teeth. And so to talk about, and it's pretty exciting that we all have bodies, which means, like, we can talk about the cultural traditions of what they do in India, but the physical experience is still the same.
Right.
Human bodies.
That's
human
true.
bodies.
Right.
So what could, if people don't have access to a therapist like yourself, what are some of the things that people could do to seek the help that they need?
Well, so I'll say two different things. One is, what I ask people to do is pick up a book, pick up a memoir, someone's personal story of loss, read the back jacket. If it seems like it's something you want to read it. You're going to feel seen and known in there, and you're going to learn something, because that person has taken all this time with their editor to talk about their personal experience in a really in-depth and personal way. Right. So pick up a memoir. If you're in a place, you're not in fresh grief and your brain still works and you can read. Listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody out there, like Glennon Doyle's talking about grief and loss. Brene Brown's talking about grief and loss. I mean, Joe Rogan's talked about grief and loss. Listen to a podcast.
Right.
Put in grief and see what comes up and listen to that. Listen to Grief Is My Side Hustle.
Yeah. Yes, I want to.
Right? Like, there are people out there who are doing incredible. They are offering so much in these podcasts that cost you nothing.
That's right.
That's a great resource because you
It's a
don't have to talk either. You can just
You can
listen.
I mean,
You
when
can
my
just
mom
listen.
died, when my mom died, I every day would get the leaf blower out. I don't know why I found blowing leaves on my tiny lawn so satisfying, but I did. And I would listen to a podcast by a genius woman named Nora McInerney called Terrible Thanks for Asking. And every one of the it's just such a good podcast. Every one of the stories is just a story of a terrible thing that happened to someone and they survived.
Yeah.
Their parents were deported. Their husband who was cheating on them was, killed in a semi accident. Like just really terrible stories. And I was like, ooh, well, at least my story's not that bad. My elderly mother just died in her sleep.
Yeah.
There are podcasts out there, and have a conversation with someone.
Yeah.
Someone who has had the experience, right? The same way that if you didn't really know what it was going to be like to have surgery, you might seek out someone who'd had the surgery.
Right.
Or if you were going
Yes.
to have a baby, or if you were going to send your kid to college, or anything, you can always rely on someone else's story. It doesn't mean that you can follow their story as an instructional guide.
Right.
Now, so that's what I would say generally. Like, if we all want to become people who can support grief and loss, every one of us should make a commitment to do that, myself included. And if you are suffering with symptoms, you do need to go get treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Look for someone who is trauma informed. Start with EMDR.
Okay.
That is what I believe.
EMDR.
I have seen and used EMDR in 1 or 2 sessions and had people be like, I don't need to come back. Now, that's not always the case. I've treated people with EMDR and all kinds of other things for complex trauma and PTSD.
Yeah, I was going to say, would that work for post-traumatic stress?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So EMDR is generally about visual images. But most of us who use it alongside a whole bunch of other mechanisms and trauma fields. But yes, I mean, I had PTSD really terribly after my mom died. I had to check myself into the same facility that I send my clients to when they need the next level of care, when their symptoms are getting much worse and they need really attentive treatment. And that's where I went because my symptoms were, it's almost like when ice forms, you'll know this in Canada, when ice forms on a windshield, like there's a point of no return where you're just like, well, I'm going to have to scrape this, this can take me hours. And PTSD, when it gets into your system, it's everywhere. And so we come at it from various forms. But there are some people that their grief symptom really is just that image. Just they can't stop with the one worst moment. And that's what we do with trauma is we often we say, what was the worst moment? And we go right in. First session, I barely know how to spell your name. We're in it.
Yeah.
And we're pulling it apart. And we're and the reason you want to see someone who's trauma trained is that you can get dysregulated really quickly. And I mean, I'll tell you, I have been not well attuned and dysregulated people. I mean, even recently, it is a fine art not to make the symptoms worse.
Right.
And so you got to ask somebody, are you trauma trained?
Right.
Them being a therapist is not enough. Do they know how to do body-centered work? And, Tina, I think people will find it frustrating, and I think they just need to keep at it. I think they need to ask their doctor. I think they need to ask an acupuncturist. Someone will know someone who does EMDR. And I mean, right now I'm trying to get myself into a menopause specialist, and I call her every day. She's like, well, since they've been doing all these podcasts on menopause, I have a waiting list. And I'm like, that's not a problem for me. I'll call you tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's like, and there's privilege in being able to do that. But I understand that there isn't a podcast and there isn't a book. I can't treat my symptoms, which for me are hot flashes. I can't treat them myself. I need a doctor's help and support. So what I'll say, and I always say this, I have a team of people that help me. And if your listeners are like, holy crow, this lady is talking to me, I have these symptoms, I need some support. If you come over to my website and email me, I can't help you find a therapist because then I can't do my regular job. That would take me all day. but I will send you to the websites of the people who do the work, who are trained.
Okay.
The names of the places. So EMDR is one, sensory motor psychotherapy is another, which is also sometimes called sensory motor experiencing, also, or somatic experiencing. I mean, also IFS, which is internal family systems with Dick Schwartz. All of these things treat trauma.
Okay. That's
And
amazing.
I'll just, if somebody needs to email me, I will have someone in my staff just, point you to my resources page, and it will give you the national numbers for the organizations. And every one of those organizations, once you pay all the money and do all the training and they get the little letters after your name, they put you in a kind of a phone book.
Oh,
And so
I
then
want
you
to, I just want to bring up quickly your podcast sort of cover. So if people are looking for you, which iTunes, all the regular places,
all the ones,
this is what you're looking for. Grief.
That's me.
Yeah, that's such a great name.
And what is your website, Meghan?
Yeah, so my website is my name, or Grief is my side hustle. You can put both in, and they will both go to the same place. And on there, it talks about work. If you want to work with me, I don't have any slots right now. So if you want to work with me, you're going on a waiting list. If you want to be part of the writing workshops, that was another thing that I wanted to offer. Is there are lots of writing workshops out there, lots of clinicians who offer really wonderful ones. Some are low price. Mine is completely free. You just come in, we pop you into the Facebook group. You get the prompts into your Facebook Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can, people talk to each other. They write to each other. Once you're in the group, you're in the group until you decide to get out of it. It's not like you only get 6 weeks. You can, the prompts will change and people suggest prompts. And there's no participation requirement. You can just lurk and listen and learn that way if you want to. But writing is a great way of learning to carry your narrative. Of that thing that we talked about, which is like coming to understand your story, writing it down often, answering questions, reminding yourself. Actually, your brain feels relieved to know you have put it down on paper. And there is some neuroscience around using a pen and paper, but I'm not going to hold people to that. You can type if you'd rather. So that's a free offering that I have. And if people come and follow me on Instagram, the grief community, probably because it's not like we make wild money in the grief community, we are really supportive of each other. And so everybody in their stories is always like, hey, there's a workshop here. This is happening on Friday. Sign up over here. I mean, it is just a
great networking.
Yeah, it's a really special group of helpers, and we all just support each other's work. So
what's your handle for
Instagram?
It's
just Meghan Riordan Jarvis on Instagram. And you'll see me and my little picture from when I lived in Taos. And I put stuff up pretty much every day. Sometimes it's just pictures of peonies that are blooming in my neighborhood. But most of the time it's little nuggets of things that I have sort of culled and curated so that people will keep thinking about, how do we integrate the concepts of grief? How do we support other people in grief?
Right.
And how do we grieve?
Yeah. Right. It's really all around navigation.
It is.
Like navigating, feeling the feels and everything else. And
it's really about getting less awkward about it, I think. And just, like I used to, a million years ago, I did the sex ed talk at school, and like, there's just no words that you can say to me. Although some now there are new words because I'm a little bit old, but back then, like there was just no, you could say all the words to me. It just, it didn't faze me at all.
Right.
And I feel like that's also, we just need to get used to talking about the things that are true about grief and loss, so that people don't feel like I'm a freak because I feel these things.
Exactly. Or embarrassment. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to feel
there's so much like, oh my gosh, thank you. One of the things I say to grievers I ask them, I say, are you obsessed with dying now? And they their eyes will pop out. Or are you really worried someone else is going to die? Like, do you have
like themselves, you mean?
Yeah, because it's super common after you've had a traumatic loss to be like, oh my God, is that breast cancer? Oh my God, is that, is my ear falling off? Like, it is really common to
everything's heightened, eh? Like,
100%. Or to kind of look at your like sister.
Mm-hmm.
Be like, what would happen? What would happen if I lost her too?
Right.
And then we're in these ruminations, and it's just totally standard. And people don't know it's standard. They think there's something crazy going on with their brains. So just, gosh, as much as we can talk about it, and I'm so grateful, particularly because this isn't your like home space. You guys have a super cool story, and I'm going to have you on my podcast so we can talk about why this has been interesting, why you're interested in this topic. But it is a real gift to give your listeners space to talk about something that there's no way they're going to avoid. 0%.
That's the thing. That's right. It's just part of life.
Yeah, thank you. I've learned a lot tonight.
Yeah, me too. Like, I'm so happy you came on the show, and I'd love to have you back.
Oh, anytime.
Absolutely.
Anytime. I mean, I love doing podcasts, and I am in the middle of working on a couple of books, so I'm going to put my head down and probably not even do my own podcast for a hot second and come up for air. But let's keep talking. I would really love that. And I will.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will definitely keep in touch.
Yeah. Well, I am. I mean, you haven't.
You're in.
You're coming to my podcast because I think what you guys are interested in and how you use your time, talents, and energy is just going to be really exciting to my group. So.
Awesome.
We'll just keep the partnership going.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
That was awesome.
It was awesome. She's awesome.
Very informative. Excellent. Just awesome. Just lovely. I really, really like her a lot. So I'm so glad we got connected with her.
Me too.
So just quickly, our next show is June 2nd, and it's going to go back to our Women in Drag Racing series.
Right.
So everybody join us then, and I don't know, have a good night.
Good night. Bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.